First, so first we have Brian Park. Brian is a startup evangelist, advisor, and angel investor. He is currently the managing partner at SparkLabs Cyber Plus Blockchain. He's also the DC chapter director of Startup Grind, which is one of the largest high-tech startup communities in the world. He has over 20 years of professional experience in web, online, mobile product development from AOL, Merrill Lynch, and has started 3 previous startups. He has featured in Forbes as 17 top business gurus to follow. Next, we have Jay Suri. Jay is the Vice President of IoT and Blockchain Applications Development at Oracle. Jay has over 22 years of experience in various roles, including product management, engineering management, technology leadership, and software development for enterprise markets. Jay holds an MS in software management from CMU and has been recognized by Business Insider in 2016 as one of the 26 rockstar engineers driving change at Oracle. Finally, we have Constantin Kostenko. Constantine is a senior director for strategy and blockchain solution architecture at Consensys Mesh. He has deep expertise in blockchain technologies and NFT-based projects for both consumer apps and enterprise clients. He is the co-founder of Euler Beats, an NFT project combining algorithmically generated art and music, which generated $1.1 million in royalties in his very first week. He is a former chief technologist with Booz Allen, where he ran a slice of the IT strategy and software delivery business in support of mission critical systems used by millions of users. Constantine also has an MSIT in software engineering from CMU. So with that said, if our panelists are ready to go, we'll dive straight into conversation for the first 40 minutes. And Ravi, if I'm not mistaken, we have the last 15 minutes for Q&A, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so if everyone is ready, let's get started. So on the outset, where I'd like to start with is, so I understand that blockchain technology can mean different things to different people, right? There are public blockchain solutions such as Bitcoin, Ethereum on one end of the spectrum, and all the applications that are currently being built on Ethereum, and they largely focus on decentralization and disintermediation. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have private blockchain solutions where various entities sort of come together to implement consortium blockchains where they try to achieve different process efficiencies. So my question to our panelists today is, could each of you describe your journey into the blockchain crypto world and what the technology actually means to you in this spectrum of decentralization that I described? So Brian, why don't you start this, kick us off first?
Sure. So thank you for the introduction and thank you for having me here. Really appreciate this. CMU, I always think that it's the most tight tech geeky community in the world. So really appreciate you guys participating. So how I got into the blockchain is actually through Startup Grind. So when I was COO there, we actually had, I joined when there was about 20 chapters. When I went there, we grew that up to like 600. Now it's about 2,000, and there's about 2 million entrepreneurs. But there was one director who I sat next to. We always have a directors like conference, and I sat next to him and got to know him. And so he was like, "Hey, have you heard of Bitcoin?" And I'm like, "Oh, I've heard of it." But he's like, "Hey, can I send you some?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Well, if you have a phone, then I can kind of send it to you like PayPal, right? Or Venmo." It's an app. He had an app. And so I basically registered my phone number, and he had sent me a few dollars in Bitcoin. And that was in 2013. And I don't know if you know him, but Michael Turpin was the chapter director of Las Vegas there. And so I don't know, Michael Turpin is a pretty big name in the Bitcoin space, and he does the Bitcoin Angels. And so he introduced me there. Obviously, he was part of the big hack, very infamous hack where literally tens of millions of dollars were stolen through a SIM swap. And so then he subsequently had a lawsuit against AT&T for loose protocols, right? For anyone to kind of take over somebody's phone. And anyway, so that's how I got into it. And from there, I just kind of kept my pulse on it. And then around 2015 is when I joined SparkLabs. And SparkLabs, again, not to kind of reiterate that, but it's one of the fastest growing accelerator programs from the APAC area. So we invested about 300 startups, from seed to Series A funds. And so I was basically in charge of launching their 12th accelerator that was focused on cyber and blockchain. And so, that's how I got into it. And then my explanation of blockchain, a really short one-liner, I would say it's probably like the biggest decentralized, most hacked, most resilient computer in the world. And because of that, it's a great foundation of innovation that can happen literally anywhere in the world. So anybody can, create a program and it's running totally decentralized. It's almost like it's its own little animal that you release into the wild, and what comes back, and it's like this huge beast. So that's my little spiel on blockchain. So I'll hand the mantle to someone else.
All right. All right. Thank you, Brian, for that. Jay, do you wanna go next and probably like just
Sure.
highlight?
Yeah.
Sure. Go ahead.
Yeah. Thanks, Adil, and thanks for inviting me. It's great to meet everyone. So my journey with blockchain wasn't as cool as Brian's, where someone gave me sent me some Bitcoin. I wish it was that way. I would have been like super rich by now. But no, I have been at Oracle working on emerging technologies, basically looking at disruptive technologies as they transform, as we use for digital transformation, as we call it in supply chain industry primarily. And I've been very focused on technologies such as IoT and AI. And we started looking at blockchain a few years ago, and we immediately saw the potential on how it can drive disruption in how business is conducted in multi-tiered supply chains. I mean, when you think about an enterprise that is doing business with multiple companies, you have a network. Every company has a network out there of trading partners, suppliers, and logistics providers, and so on. So we really started getting excited with the permission-based blockchains, and that's where our focus is, those private blockchain networks, where we can really model a business, a whole supply chain, and how could we can enable transactions and monitor those transactions. And that's where we are. We have a product set that we've built on this, and we have some customers that are already starting to use it for some amazing use cases. So we're really thrilled about the potential that exists out there. And my definition of blockchain, it's very simple. In my mind, it's the next evolution of the internet. Today, the internet is about exchanging information. Blockchain will make it about exchanging value. So everything can have a value that each of us can trust and safely transact. And that's what blockchain is going to enable, whether it is in a private model or whether it's in a public model. Thanks.
All right. Awesome. That is a great response. Thank you for that. And Constantine, do you want to go next?
Sure. Thanks so much for having us. So happy to be here, part of alumni group. So yeah, my journey into blockchain was, it's kind of one of those things where you hear about it and then eventually it gets to you. I think I entered this space professionally in 2017, full-time, paying attention and realizing you can actually have a career and do something with it. But really it started by, again, hearing and seeing friends building computers, doing the mining operations for Bitcoin and otherwise, and you start exploring it. And then again, one thing leads to another. I actually wrote a Medium post documenting my journey because I felt it's so significant, and how it's once you catch this bug, and even in my case, I haven't built computers since I was a little kid, so I actually built up my own mining rigs to just to see how it all works together and kind of see it all in action. And specifically for me, I was building Ethereum rigs at that time, as my journey, I would say the only time I truly had to go back to my Carnegie Mellon books for like serious hardcore computer science related stuff was probably when I was really digging into zero knowledge proofs, as well as really understanding the state machines and transformations. Like there's formal logic is something that really kicks in when you start talking about smart contracts and blockchains and things like that. So I really felt that my Carnegie Mellon education really kind of paid off that moment when you started really understanding how this stuff works, the transformation works within the blockchain. And anyway, so that certainly was kind of the part of my journey in learning and kind of like building up of everything that I got from CMU. Yeah, and it just, you know, I started my kind of journey working in enterprise use cases, some government use cases, some enterprise use cases, as well as now getting into consumer use cases as well. Talk about them in a bit more detail. And so what excites me about I think blockchain, where we're heading, similar to what one of the speakers said earlier, is the building the missing parts of the internet. So that's really the privacy part, it's the money part, and that's the transfer value part. And I'll pause on this.
All right, awesome. Thank you for that. Thank you all for like your great introductions. I'll kick off our conversation with something that probably like everyone would want to hear from is, so, and this especially goes to Brian and Constance, right? Since both of you work closely to venture capital, and Jay, you can add on if you have like anything interesting from the world of enterprise technology. But what we'd really like to know is, what are some of the opportunities and use cases with blockchains that are getting a lot of traction from the world of venture capital? So Brian, I think it'd be great if you could kick this one off, and then we could just have a conversation on that for a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think so there's I guess there's two school of thoughts here with VC funded versus getting funded decentralized through a public token sale. And for the most part, you're seeing the latter, right? So that obviously brings an interesting dynamic, right, to the market, where anybody could literally just write a white paper and have some marketing machine behind it, put it out on Ethereum, right, or BSC or whatever it may be, and then start an ICO, right, or IEO or an EIEIO. There's so many different IEOs, I guess, right? So it's really interesting to kind of see that, where with enough oomph and like marketing ingenuity, I guess, then you could probably swing a pretty good public token offering. But I always say, like, you know, if you see like VCs, and especially the top rated VCs, especially in the blockchain space, they always go back to like the whole VC model and why you should always, you know, go to top rated money, right? Because what they'll offer you is there's a lot of things that say like a public sale doesn't, right? And it's almost like you're skipping a very important growth organic sort of process, right? Which is, you know, when you're growing a company, you want to go through some of the pains, and you want to get access to some of the networks that comes with VC funding. So obviously, like, operating roles become more pronounced, right? So raising money and equity with some token bonus, like that's I think that's obviously an interesting model that VCs will look at, where it's like, hey, can we invest into your project, but then can we get some of the tokens at a discount? Then subsequent, when you go public, right, to the world, it's almost like the capital markets, where you're getting cheap equity, right? And then there's the whole like operating functions of a VC, where they provide like corporate governance, you know, product development, you know, again, some of the top VCs, that's what they focus on, is product development and talent acquisition. So obviously, you know, those are some of the key differentiators, right? Like where there's a fight for talent, and VCs sort of bring that to the table. And also, like, the other thing too is that VCs also bring like key partnerships for some of the enterprise space. So we kind of see like a lot of interesting things happening And yeah, I think that's one of the dynamics that I always think like, wow, what would this, if this continues to be like this, where companies are doing their own public tokens and they're figuring out how to do that really well without VCs, then VCs have a lot to worry about, so to speak. So yeah, I'm not sure if I answered your question, but yeah, there's a I feel like that part of it is about the public token offerings is sort of disrupting the VC industry. In terms of like market opportunities, I think I'll wait for the other questions, and I can probably go into more of that. But yeah, my main point is about it's disrupting the VC industry.
Got it. Understood. Like, Constantine, do you want to add?
Yeah, sure. Happy to add. So I guess I'll continue Brian's topic. It's super exciting about disruption of VC industries as a whole. It's 100% agree with what Brian said, that VCs provide not just the funding, right? Funding is easy. Money is easy. It's really the networks and the opportunities and guidance that can help you along the way. That said, what the blockchain world gave us is a different way of actually seeking funding for the projects. You no longer need a VC to have something big, right? It's more of a bottoms-up approach. In some use cases, probably I'll say some use cases, you start at the bottom, where what you do, you start with a community, you start with idea, with a concept, right? And then you can build the infrastructure, governance infrastructure, as well as the voting infrastructure. And so one route, what Brian mentioned, is ICOs, initial coin offering, or you can have an offering on exchange. Another way is you actually start with the community and you allocate portions of the token to the community itself early on. And then you actually use the power of the community to help you build out the product, to help you build out the marketing and the actual infrastructure. And that creates all kinds of different set of incentives where the community itself, which could be thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, are incentivized to actually do the marketing for you or with you, right, to shape the product to move forward. So it puts the ownership and responsibility in the community itself. It's not an easy thing to do, but it is certainly an option of that is actually happening. It's happening right now in the world. So one quick example, there's a really good podcast called Bankless. And it's just, two people who started it. They're the leaders, they have subscriptions, and then they have a big fan base. And then the fan base decided to self-organize really and create different other additional content associated with the podcast, completely independent of the podcast. Podcast leaders have no governance or leadership over this, what they call DAO, which is distributed autonomous organization, which is used to fuel that. And so underneath is this kind of DAO token. You need to buy in to be part of the community. And then whatever community builds, whatever products they build, it becomes either the community reaps the benefits, right? So that's another example of kind of what you can do in different ways of funding. But to answer, I do the question more precisely, what's being funded right now in this ecosystem? So things around decentralized identification being funded, a lot of work in blockchains across bridges being funded right now. So as we all know, there's multiple blockchains that exist. The dominant ones are the Ethereum, as well as Bitcoin. But then, of course, there's a number of other blockchains that serve other different purposes. So there's a lot of funding happening in this kind of core infrastructure, as well as new things being built right now. So there's kind of the tooling for DeFi, as well as kind of unique analytics. Anything you imagine, a brand new network being built out, things are being built out. So storage, decentralized wallets for interactions, kind of these bridges I was talking about between different kind of Web 2.0 world and Web 3.0 world, as well as different business use cases, including like in supply chains, as well as the social media itself. We heard about kind of disintermediating Twitter and a number of other integrations. And then finally, let's say kind of consumer specific things. So things like decentralized video, decentralized music, decentralized file management applications, the non-fungible tokens associated with kind of tracking the value, having this digital value. We've seen an explosion of art. We've seen an explosion in collectibles. So there's a lot of interesting use cases being both funded by VCs as well as funded directly with the community through either token sales directly or indirectly.
Got it. Thank you for that. So it's almost like, to just summarize both of your responses, it's like different components of the internet being built again, but in like a decentralized model. So you said decentralized storage, payment mechanisms. So it's almost like different components of the internet being recreated, but following this model. So I find that really interesting, and I can really vouch for Brian's answer as well from my experience 3 years ago in terms of like facilitating so many of such ICOs. So I think Brian is very right in assuming the VC industry is itself should be like a little concerned about the new funding model and how things are unfolding. Closely related to this subject, right? So something else that this blockchain slash crypto industry is introduced is a lot of new and innovative business models and financial solutions. So this could include like banks coming together to form consortiums for many digital transformation initiatives. And then there's like all the millions of tokens, like what Constantine talked about, that's created on Ethereum, in addition to like the exciting world of like decentralized finance and all the new business models that emerge. So one that specifically interests me that I've really found amazing is the quadratic funding model that Gitcoin uses. I want to know from our panelists, like, could you pick like one interesting or exciting business model that really appeals to you in the space, and what really excites you about it? So Jay, perhaps, do you want to kick this one off for us?
Sure, yeah. One of the things I'm very passionate about is technologies like IoT, for example, because I spent a lifetime in that. And a business model that I find really interesting these days is a company called Helium Networks. It's not a new company. I think they were founded in 2013 or something like that. What they're trying to do is build a decentralized network for IoT devices. So basically, every device out there will be connected in a few years. But what network are they going to connect into? We still need those centralized networks run by Verizon's and AT&T's of the world. But Helium is trying to build a decentralized network where all of us would run a router in our home, and each of these routers talks to each other using a mesh network. But how do you incentivize people like myself or people like you to put a router in your home so that we build a decentralized network? That's where blockchain comes in. They've actually introduced their own token, which they call Helium Network Token, and then each of these routers acts as a mining node. And so now, if I run network traffic through my router, I earn HNT tokens. So now you're incentivizing people to be part of this network. I mean, the great thing about Bitcoin is the reason I think it succeeded more than all the other cryptocurrency efforts in the past was the incentive mechanism that is so well built in as part of this cryptocurrency. And I think that's what made it successful, and the fact that Helium is trying to kind of bring that to the IoT and network space is really interesting for me. And I'm very curious to see what other kind of creative ideas people come up with in this space. But that's something I was fascinated by.
Yeah, agreed. Like Helium is truly fascinating the way it's evolving. I'm very curious to see the kind of adoption it gets as well. Like, what does it take for us to actually get people to install one of these router situations in their homes and like start earning the tokens, right? I think, Constantine, do you want to give a shot at this as well in terms of some of the new and some of the business models it appeals to you?
Yeah, sure. So two business models interest me. Specifically, I would say the non-fungible token craze that one would say started early this year. I would say actually the non-fungible token craze started at the very beginning of the blockchain, because these use cases actually have been around. And this is a Jai's, it's familiar to Jai's and other work that Ernst & Young and Oracle is doing in supply chain. So the early supply chain track and trace use cases were actually all about this kind of non-fungible tokens, being able to track things. A lot of this has been happening before standardization. So some of you may have heard something called like 1155 standard and the ERC 721 standard that allows you for different kind of tokens to be expressed in a similar way. But it's all been happening all along. So I think the non-fungible token revolution has been happening in the art space, is really unlocking kind of the ownership as well as the value recognition narrative. So one thing you can now have, right, is a digitally native artifact that you can truly own, right? You can truly own. And so this really flips this concept of owning something that's truly digital. So that's the missing part that we have not had in the internet, right? We had these issues of people able to copy things, not being able to attribute things and actually prove that you own something. And now you can't. You can actually own something, and it's that something now has value, right? So that's, I think, is incredibly exciting. This is why you've seen this explosion of art as well as different projects happening on chain. So that's one. And the second one I already mentioned is the DAO, distributed autonomous organizations, which is really a business structure that allows you to control how a group of people is working. It's all, of course, interconnected together. We mentioned before this decentralized finance, how it enables the money flow without having centralized authority. So this is kind of a similar way, because blockchains like Ethereum have the smart contracts kind of infrastructure that enables it to run any computer program. Really enables you to do governance, right? Governance on voting and decision making by a collective. So I think this really unlocks a brand new business model for how businesses will come together as well as transform together. So you no longer have a top-down command and control structure. You no longer need to have command and control structure for certain use cases.
Got it. That's very interesting. So NFTs and DAOs are definitely have been talked about in this space, as you can imagine, for like so long, and it's like really pleasant, like especially for the three of you who've been like in this space for so long. It's fascinating to actually see so much adoption and attraction that it's been getting recently. Brian, do you want to wrap up and like give your views on what you feel are some of the most interesting business models emerging in this one?
Yeah, for sure. So back to what Constantine was talking about was like the NFT. So yeah, we are definitely interested in NFT as well. We always say, like, I mean, you heard in the 80s, content is king, right? But now we're saying the rights to content is king, right? And that's the rule of the land. And so how do you do that, electronically? And NFT provides that. So, I mean, if you just kind of look at the NFT market, like, and this kind of like these figures are actually like 6 months old, but then it's like I'm sure they're doubled now, right? But like last time we looked at it, like the total NFT like market cap amount was like 21 billion, and I'm sure it's much bigger than that. Average price for an NFT was like $80, right? I'm sure it's much more than that. And like just even like the volume, right, that you see on like so just like when you see stocks trade, right, like there's NFT that's trending as well, and you're talking about like hundreds of millions, like near $1 billion that's been trading. And I never really thought about NFT as a big trend like before, but like back in February 16th, like there was Christie, they had actually auctioned off like its first ever like pure digital blockchain artwork, right? And I remember like just someone was tweeting it, they're like, hey, this is gonna be a big event, and I'm like kind of rolling your eyes and you're like, okay, what is this? And like the bid started at $100, then it went up to 200, then it went to 1,000, right? And I'm like, okay, and it's just a digital art. And then it went up to 1,000, then it went to 10,000, and suddenly it's going up to the millions. And then at the end of it, it sold for $69 million. And this is Beeple, right? Who created the most expensive NFT art ever. And by the way, he's created the third most expensive like art. He's like the most expensive of all living artists, right? Behind like, I don't know, this guy, Jeff Koons and Hockney or something like that. But anyways, so the point was that NFT got to a great start, right? And so like you can't, when you see something like that, like you just can't ignore it. You know what I mean? Like you definitely have to be like, okay, there's something there. And like just even looking at the contemporary market where people are buying like contemporary art, and you're like, why are they doing that? And obviously there's some tax benefits and things like that we don't know about, but the point is that it's definitely filling this market. So the thing is, like, the NFT is definitely going to be a very interesting market, and sort of all those players that are trying to build infrastructures in place. The other thing that I thought was really interesting is like now you're seeing like some innovation even in the NFT in finance. And so like, there's a company, I don't want to name it, but it basically are creating NFT for liquidity pools, right? So, you know, I don't know if you guys ever put money into liquidity pools, but basically it's like, if you imagine like a decentralized market maker. I used to work at Merrill Lynch when I first graduated from CMU and doing high-speed trading. And one of the things that I was working on was market making. And, you know, it's computer driven, but then there's, at the end of the day, there's a human, right? That makes sure that things are working correctly. Yeah, this here is like, how does trade happen, especially with these decentralized exchanges? How does that trade happen? Well, it's because there's a pool underneath it that's taking trades on both sides, right? So the problem is that when you go in there, you put your money in, that could be a very deep pool or it could be a shallow pool, right? If it's very deep, that means like less money for everyone else. But then you're like, hey man, if I want to take my money, just temporarily put it over here, or maybe be ubiquitously everywhere. That's what NFT is doing, right? And so like it's crazy because like no one's stopping anyone from doing that because all this stuff is open source. It's just kind of like Wild West out there. But what's nice is that it's because it's out there, people are putting their money, like people are going to put their money where it works. So like obviously you have hacks and stuff, but if there's billions of dollars that's trading, you know, on DEX and there hasn't been a hack, more people and more adoption happens. So it's really interesting. Again, the NFT space is becoming very, very, very interesting. I think it's going to continue to evolve. And the second thing I wanted to talk about was like the DeFi. So I know we talked, DeFi had been a buzzword, you know, like a year ago. I think that DeFi, and for those who don't know DeFi, it's decentralized finance. So it's basically, if you can imagine, Wall Street, right? Merrill Lynch, JP Morgans of the world. Imagine if they were completely decentralized, like this DAO that Constantine was talking about, right? There's no CEO. It's everything's run, you know, open source. It's anybody that has a machine that can open this, run the infrastructure piece, their server or whatever. The thing is that in DeFi right now, like, if for those who worked in Wall Street, you realize that there's literally 100,000 Wall Street products, like literally, like bond, a stock, right? Like there's 100,000 of these products, right? In these CEX, right? On centralized exchange, like centralized world. And we've only hit a few thousand of them right now. And so we're literally at the 1%, right? And we have 99% to go. So the point is that what would that even look like, right? When retail starts to even now go into the DeFi space, it's like now they're realizing like we have to actually face the music, right? We have to like figure out how to involve ourselves in the DeFi space because customers are actually asking for it. If we don't comply, then they're going to leave. So anyways, like so those two spaces I would say is very interesting. And it'll be very, I think again, we're just literally in the starting, literally inning number one of this whole game for all the DeFi space.
Yeah, and I can vouch for that as well. So even in a lot of products, we're building the crypto space at EY. So we're getting like one of the most interesting use cases, like actually real world assets being digitized onto like public blockchain platforms, and then using those assets as collateral for actually taking out loans in DeFi. So this is again something very interesting that's emerging, and I definitely recommend everyone to like keep an eye out for it. So I think as we approach the tail end, I think this is going to be like a little bit of a harder exercise, I'd say, for our panelists. But then I'd really want to go through and see the kind of like what you guys actually end up producing. So you guys are very good at this, that is being visionaries, right? So let's imagine it's the year 2030. It's the future. We're living in 2030. Could you paint us a picture of what you imagine the world will look like being fully enabled by blockchain and crypto technology? But then remember, you have to put the hat of being in 2030. So, and like probably you can assume that there's no pandemic going on as well, just for like simplicity. But then how do you imagine this world being enabled by blockchain and crypto? So Constantine, do you want to kick us off on this one?
Sure. Okay. Well, so 2030, 10 years or so from now is a bit of a trick, of course. question to answer. I would say that by that time, we're going to have absolutely mass adoption. I'm being very optimistic here, of course. Blockchain is going to be really transparent. We're not going to see or feel it. It's just going to be there. So examples of this, when you take a picture on your phone, for example, it will automatically create a token associated with it. And kind of the right that you took the picture on the specific device is going to be kind of recorded, right? And it's going to be your personal digital right. So, but what I'm describing, that's really like a year away from now, maybe 2 years away. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how kind of the developing world adopts and uses blockchain to potential leapfrog, just like we've seen in Africa. The nations really skipped the landlines, right? And they adopted and they popularized the internet with the mobile phones, the leapfrog. I think we're going to see a lot of adoption in developing countries, more so than developed countries, for some specific life-changing use cases. And as for the future, like Brian said it correctly, that is over time we're going to see every single industry is going to be impacted, from entertainment, as we're starting to see right now, to all the different financial products. What we will see, and this is actually happening right now, this is living on edge, we will see game studios, we're going to see movie studios being built, not necessarily from the Hollywood top down, but it's going to be actually happening at the grassroots level. People have an idea, right? Maybe it starts with a like a story, and then somebody writes a book, or maybe co-writes the book, and then the characters out of the book become, let's say, some aspects of it becomes tokenized, and then that gains traction, and people decide, okay, well, let's make a short movie out of that. Let's make a full-scale movie of that. Let's have merchandise coming out of that, right? It's going to be a different way of actually coming together and building it. And so, and most importantly, it's going to be about the ownership. I think we're going to see the ownership narrative, the money narrative. Ethereum is money, ETH is money. We're going to see cryptocurrencies certainly going head to head with the regulators globally. It's going to be happening, certainly, I think, in the next 5 years of this kind of balance being met between the centralized finance and decentralized finance. And then I think just generally the future is bright, as it will enable folks who are competent and interested all over the world to participate in the global ecosystem without the gatekeepers. So these intermediaries that control control a lot of the value flowing through different networks, they will be challenged in every single industry. And that's incredibly exciting, because intermediaries have their role. To quote Joe Lubin, the founder of Consensys, they have the role, but their role will be tested, and they will have to kind of live up to their role in every single industry. Kind of one example, what we've done was the Euler Beats project, which we launched recently this year, is showing that whoever owns a token also owns the royalties associated with a token. So anytime somebody buys a print of a token, right? In our case, it represents generative art and music. The owner of the token, so it could be the artist, could be the business, automatically gets a royalty without actually going through intermediaries. Those of you who may be familiar with the music space know that it takes quite some time for artists to actually get paid, right? It goes through different networks, to different intermediaries, and finally, money gets to the artist. In our case, we showed to the music industry that the royalties and payments can be instant. That's a game changer. So those are one tiny example of how things will be absolutely changing across every single industry.
Right, that's like fantastic. Though you almost touched across every single industry that's gonna like bound for change. Jay, do you want to add on to something which Constantine might have missed?
Sure. Yeah. Well, he covered it very well. Maybe the only thing I would add is basically from a software industry point of view, I think a lot of stuff will have to be rewritten. I mean, we went through a big transition when we went from plain HTML to mobile first kind of model of building applications, and then we transitioned to cloud native, and now everyone's trying to get on the cloud, building cloud native applications. This decade is going to be perhaps blockchain native or decentralized native. So that will change how we build applications, the frameworks today don't support building decentralized. I mean, the dApps are just starting. The frameworks that are coming on top of Ethereum and other blockchains are just evolving right now. I mean, if you compare where you are on the internet and the frameworks that exist to build apps and where we are on blockchain, there is tremendous amount of progress to be made. So yes, I mean, will the world move to blockchain native? Hopefully decentralized networks, decentralized ledgers, distributed ledgers catch on, and we'll have to rewrite a whole bunch of stuff at that point. And maybe 2030, our apps would look completely different than what they look today. Let's hope so.
Got it. I think you bring a very good point as well, right? So for like all the entrepreneurs in the audience, if you think about it, I think the way they should think through this technology is like really change your frame of mind, because I'd assume, like, say for example, when I first moved to Malaysia about 5 years back, I had to like start through a lot of processes which involve intermediaries. I had to like start a bank account, set up my ID, and all this involved going through various intermediaries. But then in the future, we're imagining a world where you just have full control, where there's not these institutions anymore, but then you get full control of what you would want to do with, like, say, if you want to start a bank account, more often than not, you wouldn't have to do it. You could just probably be directly paying through tokens. So just on the same topic, Brian, if you could wrap this conversation up with like what you'd imagine you'd see in the world in 2030, that'd be amazing.
Yeah, well, first of all, I think you guys got to buy Bitcoin now, so then you'll reap the benefits in 2030, where it could be $500,000. So that, but I think in 2030, again, okay, so 2030 is actually not that far. I was hoping it would be like 2050, right? Because I think the 2050 angle would be much better. Can I answer in 2050 instead? Because 2030 is like, it's literally just a decade, right?
Yeah.
Like,
so I think I put it at 2030 to like give like a realistic picture to the audience. Say if someone wants to be an entrepreneur tomorrow, maybe he could shoot for 2030. But then since you have something for 2050, let's hear that out as well.
Well, no, I you know, it's funny because I mean, not to make this long, I just maybe it's a little sinister. I remember watching a YouTube, and the guy was like, "Hey, I went into the future and I got a glimpse of it, right? Like 20, through 3000 something, right?" And he was like looking around. He's like, "What's going on?" And like, literally, it was like the Roman Empire, but nobody was working, right? And they're like, "Hey, actually, so first of all, the Earth population was half, so it's already sinister already. But it was that the future was like almost run by the machine, right?" And then when he asked, like, "Hey, like, how do you get paid?" He's like, "Well, I get paid by creative salary, like just being creative, then I get paid, right?" And I was thinking about that. I'm like, where in the, like, how would you ever get in a world like that, right? And if you think about it, like kind of like where the decentralized world's going, you're kind of what I see how blockchain is and Bitcoin and sort of what it's sort of creating in the world. It's really creating more of a automated world, right? It's automation, right? And so now when you have blockchain, in addition with all the other technology like AI, right? Now just imagine this, decentralized AI, right? That word alone, think about that. You're like, what could be applied there? I grew up, my dad was a Air Force radiologist, right? And so I remember going to his work, and I watched his work, and he's in the hospital, and he's like going looking at their X-ray, and he's like, fracture, no fracture, right? Fracture, no fracture, right? And every time he did that was like $500, right? I mean, if he did in the private world, to be $500. And so the point is that if you had AI, decentralized AI, like imagine that any high knowledge, skilled profession, like where you're being paid for your opinion, imagine that being decentralized, right? So now like you have a $500 radiologist reading, it could be essentially free, right? And like, hey, can I submit like my image? Can I submit my tax forms? Can I, like, any of these, like, again, these professions that they give you advice, lawyers will be free. Wow, I can't wait, right? But the point is that like that's possible, right? That's possible, like because of what Bitcoin has done, right? Bitcoin has done the store of value and not exactly immediate exchange, but the point is that it's completely decentralized finance, right? And like here is what a machine is creating: the smartest professional, because it's learning uninterrupted, right? And it's all being built on the protocols that are being built today, right? So, you know, will robots like completely replace like manual labor? And I don't know if you read one of Bill Gates' book. He was like, we're still a long ways for that, but in terms of knowledge workers and decentralized AI decentralized, that would probably happen faster than, you know, than robots replacing the lawnmower guy. But anyways, that's kind of how I see the 2050, where you're going to see more of that happening. And now, like, because people want to use it, it becomes smarter. And so you're going to have like these machines, these knowledge machines, like Ethereum run, like blockchain run, as sort of these sort of epicenters of knowledge. And it's uninterrupted, and it's learning constantly. So that's kind of how I see it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's really futuristic there. I struggle to believe you actually like thought through that and it's like could envision something like that at 2050. We'll jump straight into some of the questions we've got, and this was originally planned to like being asked to like some of you as well. So at this point, what do you think are some of the biggest challenges you see in the adoption of blockchain technology? I'll leave it open, and probably like one of you who'd want to pick it up can go for it. Jay, do you want to start us off? You look like you're about to start.
No, I was going to say, oh, wow, no one wants to take that. No, actually, maybe I'll defer to Constantine. Perhaps he has the most closest to development experience in this, perhaps.
Yeah, so there's plenty of challenges in this industry for sure. I think right now, you know, I'm actually quite a bit split about this. Everybody's talking about challenges of onboarding, you know, to blockchain. People saying, oh, it's hard to get a wallet. It's hard to understand things for basic transactions. And then I reflect back on what even Adil said, remembering how difficult was it for me to go get a bank account, for me to learn how to write a check, for me to understand how everything fits together, even to use an ATM in the 80s. Like there was an ATM and there was a card, and you had to explain to people, you put this plastic thing into this machine and you type this pin, and then magically money comes out of this machine. I mean, think about the leap that took for people to do that, for a leap for people to use credit cards. I mean, not such a long time ago, people would write paper checks at the grocery stores, at least in the United States, to pay for that. People would not even trust credit cards. They use cash, right? Cash is king. And then that leap has slowly happened, but it happened, right? People were educating themselves. So there's a ton of improvement can be done, but people, I think there's a lot of criticism, which I don't think is necessarily fair. People expect for things in the blockchain world work at the snap of the fingers, while forgetting how much effort it took people just to learn routine things would do, even like paying bills, right? Like you need to know how to like read kilowatt hours in your meter, right? It still takes some education. So, and in grand scheme of things, I mean, the question is about the challenges. So yes, I think education is challenges. I think really understanding there's so much happening in the blockchain world. It's being now drained by noise. You hear about different blockchains, even just in this call, we talked about the Bitcoin, there's Helium, there's Ethereum, and there's many other networks. And so I think the challenge is education of what is real, what is not real. The challenge is also, I think, fraud. Like the systems for their systems for catching fraud are not kind of here yet. We talk about kind of decentralization without really explaining the challenges and what it means about decentralization. And often it means responsibility for your own assets, for your own value. And if you do make a mistake, or if you get hacked, potentially there is no undo button, right? It's on you. And there's of course mechanisms in place, but that kind of mind shift needs to be educated. So I think it's really about education and people trying things. That's the biggest challenge right now. There's many other technical challenges like cross bridges and other things, but I think those kind of, from consumer perspective, I think those are the biggest challenges from my perspective.
If I may add, I think the big irony about blockchain is that it's about building trust, but people still don't trust it. So a lot of times, if you have people conflate that with Bitcoin and the other cryptocurrencies, so they can't, in the enterprise space specifically. So if you're building a product which you're using based on blockchain and you're trying to sell it to enterprise customers, that will become a hurdle. So we tend to focus more on the business value rather than the underlying tech, like until blockchain gets that level of trust. So that, in my opinion, from a adoption of blockchain technology, as long as the end user can trust it or doesn't care about it, that's great. So they should focus on the value. And I think there's a lot of value to be derived from blockchain, but it just really comes down to, is that the message you're going to lead with, or is this really an enabler for you today?
Got it. I think those were like really good responses. We have a very interesting question that came up, and it like closely follows Brian's response to the 2050 as well. So the question is, what centralized organizations or systems do you think will remain in 2050? Like, what do you think will continue to persist?
Governments will remain centralized and centrally controlled.
Dictatorships. Yeah, government. I mean, yeah, I think so. Yeah.
As for businesses, it's actually hard to predict. It's quite possible that, I don't know, 40 years from now or 30 years from now, we're going to see a shift where a company such as Coca-Cola, for example, becomes a decentralized organization. It's actually quite feasible, right? Because Coca-Cola itself is just a corporate structure in different affiliates that do bottling across different regions, and they actually kind of subsidiaries. Similar how McDonald's, right? It's a franchise model. So there is no reason to believe why 30 years from now, there will be companies that are run as decentralized autonomous organizations, right? There's no like a central command and control, but then different franchises are voting on where direction where the organization that perceived to be centralized as a whole is gonna go. It's certainly gonna happen. I don't think Coca-Cola is gonna become decentralized in 30 years. I think there's still gonna be elements of centralized control, but that does not mean new companies are not gonna be created that are just like that. There will be thousands and thousands of people working together as a one cohesive unit without any central authority. I know it really sounds like science fiction, but we're already seeing this in practice with hundreds, if not thousands of people, transferring values. I mean, you've seen things like example, like Flamingo DAO, which is Flamingo DAO is a collective of people who own artwork, right? And they own shares in the collective, and they make governance decisions of what to buy, what not to buy, and where to invest the funds, all done in a decentralized way, where decisions being, in essence, recorded on the blockchain through smart contracts. I know that second part does not answer the question of what organization will remain. I mean, I think my answer is still governments. They will remain to be centralized.
I think that's a very, and I think we're out of time here, right? But so really quick, I think that's a very, you got right to the chase, right? It's like who's gonna be left, but I think the majority is still going to be centralized, right? Like even in 2030, 2040, 2050, it's just where you have these pockets of technology that's improving. If you think about it, like look at Airbnb and Uber and Amazon, right? Like Airbnb is already a form of decentralization, right? Like if you have a spectrum here, right? Like Airbnb, this was like the Marriott, right? This was like the Holiday Inn. Airbnb is like, I don't see it here. I see it right here, right? It's like still in the middle. And so the question is that, Airbnb, Uber, right? Amazon, will you see like now these DAOs or more of these like decentralized plays that it will even disrupt the Airbnbs, right? And the Ubers of the world. And I'd say like, yes, absolutely. Because now, like, who needs a CEO, right? Who needs like these corporate structures in there when that whole thing can be disintermediated, right? And run by smart contracts. And like, okay, well, what about like customer service? Well, that could also plug in, right, into a program to say like, hey, if you provide customer service, whether through a machine or a human, we'll incentivize you, right, with tokens or whatever it may be. The point is that that's what makes this whole like blockchain interesting, is because the whole thing is run by incentivized like bits, right, in the system. And so whether that's like your own tokens or whether that's on, you know, Bitcoin or what have you, the point is that this system can, with the built-in protocols, can now become a lot more decentralized than where it is right now. So Airbnb, Uber, Amazon, could those be completely decentralized? Absolutely.
Yep, got it. So it's like seeing it as a spectrum of decentralization and viewing it whether you can decentralize something even more. All right, I think we're out of time. Thank you so much for your responses, everyone. This was a great session. Ravi, I'll pass it back to you.
Thanks, Adil. Those were some very insightful questions and opinions. But since we're run out of time, on behalf of CMU-TNE, I'd like to thank our speakers, Brian, Jai, and Constantine, and also Adil for moderating.